Most people talk about leadership like it's theory. I've lived it in the mud, the chaos, and the moments nobody writes about. This show is the truth, raw, unfiltered, and built for leaders who actually give a damn. If you're ready to grow, ready to own your own story, and ready to lead from the front, you're in the right place. Speak up, show up, lead. Let's get into it. Okay, well, welcome back everybody to another episode of Speak Up, Show Up, Lead. Today I have with us Tanner Yackley, an Air Force veteran. But before we get into our conversation, because we'll get lost in that pretty quickly, I want to put a plug in for my book real fast. Speak Up, Show Up, Lead, the book. It's my story of leadership lessons learned through my life, poverty to the military service, and then afterwards through the transition, working some jobs, and then starting a business. So if that interests you, Speak Up, Show Up, Lead, Amazon.com. Go check it out. Tanner, how you doing today, buddy?
Good, brother. How are you?
Man, I'm excited about this conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. Thank you so much for having me on. I would greatly appreciate it.
Of course, as soon as I saw your background and your story, and then we talked about the podcast, I knew that it was going to be perfect. So
Absolutely.
I don't like to use the word perfect, but I mean, a good fit's a good fit, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's what we're hoping for. So
That's what we're hoping for. Of course, I'm not worried about it.
Yes.
So Tanner is an Air Force veteran, but he has an interesting story because he has a take on trauma that's a little bit different than the average person because he served in a different capacity than most people while we were still in combat. So Tanner, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So Tanner Yackley, I served in the U.S. Air Force from 2010 to 2018. During that time, I flew that big, beautiful bird up there. Actually, technically flew both of them. And I say flew, right? Because it's the vernacular that we use throughout. With it, we get it. You're sitting in a box in a ground control station, but at the end of the day, we're still making life or death decisions. So you train like you fight, right? And that's really what we did throughout. So I did that for 8 years in the Air Force. I did it for just about 10 total. I worked as a contractor for a couple of years afterwards. And kind of the progression, if you will, is essentially I did a 4-year combat tour, 3.5 years at the schoolhouse. Obviously, my training pipelines varied throughout. It's about 6 to 9 months, no pun intended, for the training pipelines there. And then you get farmed out to your unit after going through a bunch of different, classes, things like that. With it, tons and tons of tests, right? It mirrors a lot of, other high leverage career fields, meaning the standards a lot higher, right? So things like our testing, right? We had to get like 85s and above on everything, right? With all of its
For good reason.
exactly, and the rest of the Air Force is 70. So it's the little things like that even for me being I was 19 years old the first time I flew combat, and I didn't know the clue what I was getting into really with it all, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, it was really just at that point, and it wasn't like a typical rotation, right? And I won't get too far into this right now, but the with as far as the day to day goes with that kind of thing, it wasn't like, hey, you're doing combat, for X amount of weeks or months. Like we did combat every day. We were on an active combat line that was flown halfway around the world there, and those missions ran 24/7. It wasn't uncommon for me, and I had this happen a couple times where I would leave the ground control station after flying 6, 7, or 8 hours almost every single night. It was a luxury to get 4 or 5 hours in the box there, and we just called it, oh, I got the Ocho tonight. If you were stuck on the 8, because it was so common. Nowadays it's gotten a little bit better, right? They aren't flying as excessively, but I'd argue, and this is where a lot of my studies in psychology have come into play, is that it creates its own paradox, if you will, because you never come out of that training environment. For me, I've been removed from it since really 2020 is where I stepped away from operating period because I went and did some contracting work afterwards as an evaluator there. So it's just it creates this very unique paradox and unique pipeline that really only points to one thing. And I think that's the big piece with this is you're not going to have a whole bunch of people that are going to come out of this type of career field and this type of job and not be affected about it in some way, right? When it comes down to it, because everybody trains the same way, everybody lives the same way, right? The only variation that we ever got, because oh, by the way, besides having to do combat every single day, you were also we were on shift work. Right, so we were rotating shifts. My squadron, almost every unit's different. The missions are different. The schedules are different. The rules of engagement are different. Right, your special instructions are different because they're all tailored to wherever you're supporting. You could be supporting guys on the ground, right? You could be supporting other air assets. You could be doing raid support, convoy support, hunting high value targets. There's so many different mission sets for this, and that's why it's hard when this stuff comes up in the news, is because there's no standard for this, right? 2011. Here's a quick history lesson, right? Predator being the MQ-1, the smaller one up there, right? You can always tell because the Predator has a tail that points down. The Reaper's got the V tail up. Also, usually you see the Reaper with a full kit of 4 missiles, or they do have the capability of carrying 8 in the last couple of years now too. There, and then they usually can carry some type of bomb, right? 500,000 pound type, but they're not usually, dragging those things around all day because, well, all that does is take gas away from the aircraft. So you're killing your endurance to gain, boom, if you will. And that just wasn't the original, game plan really for it. And it took us a while, even to like 2012, to realize, oh, we can start slinging hellfires at these things really accurately and really precise when we want to. With it, I think it had like a 3 meter or somewhere around there, like circular probability, which people are like, oh, that's still a huge thing. Let's consider this: the weapons in World War II had a mile circular error probability to it, or it was
Wow.
something ridiculous. Like it was just you hear it now and it's like, what the heck? Like, how are we okay with that? Because it's like I'm gonna aim here and it's gonna hit down here. If you're playing like Battleship and it's like, little peg is like way off in La La Land. So, again, perspective there of 3 meters ain't so bad, right? When it comes
No, it's
down
pretty
to it,
good.
and there was a lot of changes that happened over the years through the munitions and things like that. Obviously, we'll keep that discussion fairly wave top, but really the big thing is so Predator came on in 98, like I'd said. 2008 was actually when the MQ-9 Reaper came on board. Technically, I think the Predator is technically retired now. Has been for some time. I think about 2018 actually, when I was getting out. And so there's your fun history lessons for the day with this. But so it came on in '08, right? And then they said, "Holy cow!" Really up into there, especially in Iraq and everything else. Like people weren't really using RPAs. Right? It was more so as a toy, right? If you talked any soft, anything like that, because obviously I brushed shoulders a lot with that career field, just because we supported a ton of them, right? If you can name it, we probably supported it at some point. Most of the time we didn't even know, who we were supporting. It was another day for us, kind of thing. So it wasn't like this, like, oh man, you're supporting this group today. Like it was just like, oh hey, by the way, those guys were, SEALs or whatever, and you're like, oh, cool. All right, like all right, and then just like going on. So I don't mean to downplay that. It's just it was such a normal thing. It's such a passive thing that now there's a lot of things that I put words to now, and I'm like, yeah, that was a little weird, to be pulling this stuff off at 19 years old and slinging these missiles and everything else through the sky, and just cutting it like butter, really, and just kind of bending it at our will, with the entire process. So it was a very big learning curve. It was, and that was the biggest thing is we had to write the playbook, because everything was so early, because the tactics didn't really exist for operating in this manner, being this 24/7, 365-degree operation, right? Because that's really, when we talk about the ramp up, that's really what happened. was 2012. And I mean, and I'm sure if anybody was on the ground in 2012 to 20, even 18, I think I heard too, because I was at the schoolhouse at that time teaching. So I kind of, you get a little bit farther and farther removed from what the
Sure.
combat lines are doing at
Of
that
course.
point. But yeah, so it's kind of that's the super quick kind of history and preamble to all this with it, and I'm sure we can expand more, but it's kind of, a lot of people don't realize how kind of old and new the MQ9 and MQ1 are, that they've been around a lot longer than people realize, but maybe not as long as people think too.
Well, and when you're not involved in that career field, you just see them flying around and they're there, but
Hmm.
you don't actually know much about it or how the operations are worked. I mean, it doesn't really matter what your job is in the military. You don't understand somebody else's career management field until you start asking questions and become intimately involved in it. So, I mean, that's pretty good, but one thing that I would like, it's a leadership podcast. One thing I would like to talk about
Hmm.
is what we discussed before we came on here today, and that is, I kind of want to get into trauma a little bit and how that plays into this career management field, because it's just so interesting. And I know it from being spending a short time on my second deployment in a convoy support center, where when you're sitting in that sheriff's department, things get pretty interesting.
Yeah.
When I say sheriff, it's basically an operations center where you hear everything that's going on in the combat
Hmm.
zone, and they're the ones who call. Anyway, I'm not going to give go too deep into that, because I don't want to give any sort of OPSEC stuff away.
Yeah.
But when you're there and you hear all this stuff happening, it's different than when you're there, because I also ran convoys, and so I
Hmm.
was in the mess a little bit too.
Hmm.
But when you're constantly in the mess, but you see it from a distance and you hear it on a regular basis, that's got to be different. And then it's not like going to the field. You don't
Hmm.
have reset time. So tell us a little bit about what that does and what you've seen and what kind of things you've helped other people with.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, really the big thing to put a label to on that is, you're talking about what we would do is called flipping the switch, right? We literally coined the damn term because it was at some point, especially one of the main bases in Nevada, there is, you got a 45-minute transit up to work there, and so because of it, you had to like sit there and go, okay, I just had somebody pissed off at me at home, HOA, whatever I'm dealing with. And now all of a sudden I got to shut it off and go, hunt bin Laden, or I got to go protect these troops on the ground and be on those convoys. And I'm going, all right, I know where the JTAC with the radio is, I know which position he's in the convoy. I know where the helo's coming in at, all these things you're mission planning out. It's not just, most of the time in the military, you've got somebody that does the mission planning and then somebody that goes out and does the execution. And obviously, you're still gonna have talks, but like intel and weather for us were, and don't get me wrong, I had some insanely insightful conversations with them, but it was almost, from our perspective, a passive role in the squadron, because while yes, they were putting the products together and those types of things, it made the dynamic weird, right? With something like that. And then also, you've got a two-person crew that's operating this. You want to talk about leadership and things like that? Try having a lieutenant colonel, in '06 sitting there, '05 sitting there, and then A1C, Yackley sitting there as an E2. And I'm like, all right. And we're just sitting there talking about the football game or the day or whatever it is, right? So all these funny little dynamics and quirks on top of shift work, on top of constant surveillance, right? Constant evaluation of what's happening, and what's going on the ground, because I constantly have to evaluate, even if I'm just staring at a goat in a courtyard, walk fucking circles for 6 hours. And I've been there, and man, does it suck, but it's a lot better than watching what they do with goats otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
There. So, watch that too. But it's like, man, I know. And it's like, but it's, your mind is constantly evaluating everything. And I use that ridiculous example because it does exactly that, right? It catches and it's like, wait, what? But that's the beef of it is I'm sitting there and I'm having to watch all this stuff happen. I have to watch a guy go and be normal for the day, right? And go and hug his wife, play with his kids in the courtyard, and then go build a bomb to go strap to a vehicle to blow up something. Then I have to watch that whole entire thing, and all the way down to me potentially taking that guy out and watching where his legs get buried and where his top half gets buried. And that's every fucking day is the potential for that. And when you do it for 4 damn years, good Lord, does it cause some wicked, issues. And so for me, I got out in 2018 and it took me years to even wrestle with the idea that I had some type of post traumatic stress, right? Now I know everybody, and especially in like soft music and things like that, right? Everybody looks at it and is like, well, it's not the same. And you're like, absolutely, it's not the same. Not even fucking close, right? I will never sit here and compare this to anybody. It doesn't matter if it's a freaking 11 Bravo. Like, it doesn't matter what side, anybody that's put boots on the ground. We're in two different hemispheres as far as a conversation goes. But it sure as hell wasn't sitting at a desk and hacking away at a computer.
No.
And that's the problem, right? Is because all of those things build into the psychological effects that are happening with this, so much so that I started pursuing a doctorate in psychology, and I've just put it on pause right now, actually, because to be frank, the initial place I started just wasn't doing a lot to help me with the entire thing, and so I wanted to kind of re-strategize and go, all right, let me find the better vector for this, and a institution that's actually going to help with this, because I really wanted to get involved in the advocacy side of this and being able to help, in that way. Because I realized, it was me and a buddy years ago we were sitting outside a ground control station, waiting to, we're working on a training event or something like that. I was probably just on a break or something. And we're going, hey, we really need to come up with a way to really advocate for ourselves, is really where it started out as. And so started putting together resources and things like that. And now the hard part is you've got this group that's growing by the day, right? Because if you remember earlier, I said the MQ9 came involved in 2008. Well, it's 2026. That means we're right on the cusp of an 18-year Air Force veteran that's been doing this shit his whole career, and for the first time ever. Right? Because all the
You're
private
making me
guys
feel
usually
old
got
just
kicked
saying
out.
that.
I know, I hate it, man. I do. I'm already coming up on almost being out of the military for a decade. And I'm like, what the hell?
Same.
It's like, God, no, I don't like it. But it's true, right? And so what's going to happen? You're going to have a bunch of you're going to have the career guys getting out, guys and gals getting out, and now all of a sudden they're going, okay, what do I do? Right? And they're like, all right, the VA, like, they'll help. The VA doesn't know what's going on. Now they finally have an inkling because the National Defense Authorization Act that we were talking about earlier just got passed for this year, and I'm working with some congressional leadership and trying to see how much I can sway that and really just make sure the right rocks are flipped throughout that process. Because the biggest struggle I can tell you, right, for me, and I've been in some really bad places with my mental health. I openly talk about it. I've done some really great, and I've been fortunate to do some really cool speaking engagements. I've got an active interview that's out there um, with Business Insider that just crossed 500,000 views. And then I've got the Turning Point series on Netflix. My service dog and I will be on this fall when it comes out for the 6th episode of it. I just got back from recording that a couple of weeks ago. It was fantastic. And I'm so excited. And it's just discussions like this, right? That's the great part about it. Is I just love any way to get the word out there and finding the right people. And I think when we talked in our very first meeting, it was just, I can tell, usually pretty quickly if, I can mesh with somebody. And obviously you and I, had that
We're here.
when we were talking. Exactly. It's always great, to be able to see that and find those types of people. But yeah, it's like I said, it's an interesting, I always call it, it was a melting pot of unseen, I used to say bad decisions, And really, the longer I've sat in this, I've been doing this advocacy thing for almost a year now, specifically for this group. And it isn't anybody's necessarily their fault, right, for how we got here and everything else, but it sure as hell is for if we keep down the path we are, because you got too many people that are getting out and they've watched. Because let's put it this way, right? My quick my my stats, right, if you will, with it, my career stats, my profile stats, right, are 8 years in, 4 years in combat, over 1,000 combat missions, and 3,400 hours, with almost 96% of it being combat time there, and that's what separates, right? Because if you go ask a fighter guy that, and I know this because our entire career field was built on fighter pilots. That's the wild part. Is because they had to pull people from somewhere, right? With it, and so one, you got a lot of good leadership qualities, right? Because these guys were no nonsense, nose to the grindstone. I mean, you're talking single cockpit, like these guys were just like fucking get in the back or get out of the way, and it was like, all right, let's figure this out. Talk about a little bit of a culture shock for a Midwest 19-year-old that all of a sudden get dumped into the fighter pilot community there. And it was like, whoo wee, this is trial by like fire hose and fire, there.
Well,
So
so let's go from a different perspective because we're talking about advocacy here. There is something that I noticed because I had a lot of trauma when I got out of the military as well. I mean, I had 35 months of combat
hmm
during my career, and that didn't catch up with me until I was getting ready in the last couple of years, slowing down and getting out as I got my promotions and then separated from service, just like a lot of us do.
hmm
But what I noticed talking to groups, I had to find the right one
hmm
because I may have had convoy time and engagement time, but I wasn't kicking indoors necessarily.
hmm
Though a couple times we had to do that, it didn't lead to much. But they send you into a room with a bunch of people who are kicking indoors,
hmm
and that's who you're supposed to do group therapy with,
hmm
and everyone's looking at you like you have a third eye or something like that, and you might be a little bit weird, or why is this guy in the room with us when we all have you know time where we're actually on the ground
yeah.
engaging with the enemy. Well, then, I'm a logistics guy. So
hmm
then the rest of my career after my combat, I was doing logistics.
yeah.
And then, I don't actually so I went to warrant officer school with a couple guys who ended up because in the army, in order to be a drone pilot or
hmm
RPA, whatever you want to call
hmm
it, you have to be a warrant officer. So
yeah.
you I went to school with those guys and they told me all about what they were doing as the second-hand guy to the guy that was flying the actual aircraft itself, and I found it very interesting, but I never met anybody
hmm
in any of these therapy groups, and I just wonder um how maybe for you or for some of your fellow pilots, how that process goes for maybe group therapy or whatever the case may be, and how it's received from other people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've done. I let's say I'm always the first to be like, I'll try it. Let's see what happens, kind of thing, right? And so I've done a lot. There's some incredible programs out there, right? And I've done anything from inpatient to, I. And this is the funny part. I always love this one because again catches people off guard a little bit. But like I've called 988 and I literally just said, hey, what do you guys do? I gotta know. I was like, what's the extent of this call? Again, because why? Because my brain was always putting things in these boxes, right? And saying, all right, this is a HVT box, right? High value target box. There. This is a family box. All right, I gotta shut that one for the shift and tuck that one away. Okay, this is a finance box. All right, I gotta put that one away too. All right, because you're dealing it with so many streams of data, right? When it comes down to it, and it's wild the transition or the lack of transition really that happens afterwards, right? So one, back to your original question of what does the therapy look like? I've done group therapy, I've done moral injury therapy, I've done depression, anxiety, all that stuff, because for the longest time they couldn't figure out what it was, right? They just kept slapping labels on it, and it's adjustment disorder, and it's like, no, trust me, this is not a freaking adjustment disorder.
Yeah.
Here, but for the most part, and this is even within like the communities, and this is also why like I like to jab at soft. I fucking love soft, right? When it comes down to it, because we did so many different supports for them, that honestly, that field is when I've been in groups and things like that's like we always kind of pair together, if you will, when it comes to it. So the reception is actually pretty good across the board, and all the way up to like I was in a moral injury group with a Vietnam veteran. And I can tell you, out of all like 5 people I had in that group with me, he was the dude that I was like, this guy gets it, like completely. And that's a weird thing to say, and again, just like the comment earlier, I'm no way comparing one to the other at
No,
all.
no,
But it's
no.
just it's the sustainment, right? And it's being in that sustained constant pressure all the time that created so many layers to this. So that way, when you are in there and that's why I think really when you're in that group therapy and things like that, um, I've always had pretty good luck with, at least the people I've been in those groups with, that it's not like, oh, the drone guy, kind of thing. Cause trust me, dude, I've been in this career field for 16 years, even though I'm out of it now, like I'm still got my nose in it, obviously with advocacy. And so it's wild that the same stigmas I was hearing at 19 years old, in training and everything else. And man, I had some piss. You want to talk about fucking bad leaders? Woo! I had some rough ones, right, in training and things like that. An aerial gunner that was one of my tech school instructors that was just fucking ripping on me every single day. And it was like, dude, seriously? And just because I was a sensor operator and he's like, oh, drones are stupid and they're not gonna work. And it was again the whole like resistant to change
He's an
thing.
instructor saying this?
Yes. Oh yeah.
What? How does
Yeah.
that prepare you for anything?
It was but that's the crazy thing is like almost every single person in that field, everything happens so quick and on these condensed timelines that almost everybody in the field had the same experience with like training, because it was just this cranked open fire hose. And so then when you get into like, all right, what works and what doesn't, the hardest thing is because the trauma is so layered, then for at least in my experience, it took me almost 6 years to finally go, okay, I have to trust the system before I can get into the system and start actually processing. Right. That's
Mhm.
why a lot of talk therapies for me didn't work, right? When it comes down to it, because different modalities there, right? And you've got different modalities. And like this is stuff I didn't even know 6 years ago until I started getting actually studying psychology. Now I do a lot of like side projects with like psychological history and military trauma. And I'm actually working on a big one trying to like make a massive timeline of it all, because I think we're just repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again.
Yeah,
But
especially
yes,
through the government treatment
yes,
system with
exactly.
at the VA and
Yeah.
anyway, that could be a whole
Mhm.
podcast
Yeah.
in itself.
I'm trying not to rabbit hole this too hard because man, I can get it, as you can tell, I can get on some tangents here. And so it's like I'm like, stay on topic here because there's so many little
Of
offshoots.
course. Well, but okay, so that's great that you've brought up all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so for you, they related very well. And that's good
Mm-hmm.
because I spend a lot of time talking to fellow veterans who have that feel like this stigma is out there
Yeah.
about, go if the one-on-one stuff doesn't work, because it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work for a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
then go talk to group therapy, because you're going to find that your problems are not unique. They
Yes.
are common and similar, and you will find that though the story may be different, the result is the same. And
Absolutely.
so, it doesn't matter if you were on the fob and you had to constantly hit the bunkers,
Mm-hmm.
or if you were doing convoys and you were constantly hearing the ping 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 ping
Mm-hmm.
on the doors and windows, and every once in a while you had to push through it all,
Mm-hmm.
or if you were getting hit and you actually had to recover people out of a vehicle, it doesn't really matter. Or if you were on the ground kicking indoors
Yeah.
and getting in firefights and the whole 9 yards, it doesn't really matter.
Mm-mm.
Yours is just another way that you are combat engaged. And yes, for you infantry and combat arms guys out there, FOBITs can be combat veterans. That is absolutely a thing that you guys don't believe, but it is the absolute truth. And and the reason is because it doesn't really matter how intense the situation is. It's how you process the intensity of that situation. And it can be from constant combat engagement. It can be from constant having to hear about all the bad stuff that's happening all the time, because that can cause trauma. We are all dealing with the same problem.
Mm-hmm.
All of us combat veterans are dealing with the same problem, and that's that we are
Mm-hmm.
moving, and reacting, but we don't take enough time once we get out to figure out how to slow our reactions down. And when we don't have anything to focus all that extra energy on, then we turn into a version ourselves that we don't recognize. And as a result of that, here's the PTSD. Here's all the stuff that now we're dealing with that maybe we didn't have to deal with on active duty because we were just so busy, and we got to get a mission. But, I just think that what you talked about,
Mm-hmm.
it brings light to that very common theme, just another form of combat.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really what it comes down to is just, as far as like the community and things like that, and a lot of the discussions I have now is just listen, like we're not trying to, tag on to anything here or anything like that. It's just we also know that change moves slow as hell, right? When it comes to anything. And especially inside the government. So, it's like, all right, are there bridges? Are there ways that we can, bridge this stuff so that these guys aren't just getting completely left out to dry? Here because like I can tell you, I had a good one of my best friends. He was in that boat we talked about earlier, right? He's coming up on 18 years. And I tell this story often because he was getting med boarded for PTSD. 18 years, the dude's has personally taken over 100 lives. And that's the piece that nobody realizes too, is think about if every combat engagement or every high stress engagement that you ever had on a deployment was replayed in front of you over and over and over and over again, because that's what we had to do endure was we ever all we had eight I had 8 different screens I was in charge of at any given time. So that's why my brain starts now compartmentalizing and doing that now on the outside, which sucks. I can tell you that does not work in the civilian life at all, and especially your relationships and stuff suffer because of it. Because spouses don't understand. Hold on, I got to shut that box and go over here and open this other one because you just talked about finances, and I need a second to switch gears. Right? I think about it like a Kentucky Derby, right? With
Mm-hmm.
race horses, and you got one that's pulling out in front, right? And the other four just kind of drop back. They ain't gone, right? They're right on that other horse's ass, ready to go. But and then you start getting them jockeying for position when somebody walks in and says, "Hey, you know, hey, what about XYZ?" And your brain just like at that point because you were thinking about that one horse that's out front, and you're just like, all right, I'm tracking that guy, and someone's like, hey, what about number 5 over there on the end? And you're like, wait, what? And so it makes it difficult to be able to switch those lanes, and I think that's the hardest part. And I can tell you, I think that's one of the most unifying parts between all of this, right? When you strip everything down, whether it's boots on the ground, convoys, helos, doesn't matter, right? If it's high stress and there's lives at stake, there's something that gets flipped there, with it. And that's really why I'm looking at like the history and stuff like that, because
Smart.
it's really intriguing and it's wild when you jump
Mm.
down the rabbit hole. And eventually, actually, I'll have an ebook on my set on the Remote Warrior site that's free that people can read exactly this. I'm only charging institutions for it because we as veterans get screwed enough. We don't need to add another bureaucratic thing to something to do with remote warfare, which is why I keep almost all my stuff free. And especially for those in it, I do a little extra stuff for them as far as like the panic pack distribution and different things there. So it because it's insane that we've gotten this far, right? The crazy thing is and I'll just ask you this direct. I'll put you on the spot on your own show. Do you know when PTSD was coined? What year or even decade?
I want to say that they talked about it in the Vietnam era, but I don't think they actually came up with it as a formal diagnosis until the 70s or 80s.
Yep, it was the 80s. There, Stockholm syndrome got coined before that, and Stockholm syndrome isn't
That's what it was.
isn't even a real diagnosis. It's just a way to describe the bank robbery in Stockholm, Sweden. But
Well,
it's which is
I
which is
cheated a little
which is
bit.
where that all came from, which is wild, right? And that's so that I bring that up because that's the stuff that I'm realizing. Like again, we're trying to build off of stuff that's a little bit shaky, right? Really with these processes and stuff like that. And so, and especially I think going from, because arguably right now the PTSD treatment, right? I think of the stuff that you mentioned earlier being like the one on one, right? I think of that as probably more traditional, 1970s DSM-3 uh, type level stuff there, which is the manual for how they say, yes, you have PTSD or not. There, we could do a whole show on that one too. I could talk all agnostically about that whole thing, but it just depends on really where you want to cut it. Because I can tell you right now, when they're providing those like one-on-one therapies and things like that, I don't think, and for I think it's effective for some people, but I honestly think there's a common thread there between anybody that's in any type of combat there, and just knowing that in your head you had a hand in taking a life, right? In some way, whether you're the trigger puller at the end or whether you're the person that looks up and sees a light go out and your brain goes, light extinguished, person dead, right? I'm not saying it has the same effects, but I'm saying it, hey, it's still at the same time it's gonna start altering, right? Your thoughts are, and things like that, and gets into the whole neuroplasticity piece. But that's why manifestation exists, right? That's why you see so many people go into transition out of the military, struggle like hell, beat it into them to go, nope, I'm not going to do this. I need to, stay over here on this side of the wall, if you will, and stay on the green grass side and do it, right? Because if you feed your own brain and you feed what you want to do every single day and say, this is the goal I want to achieve, this is what I want to do, and this is what I want to bring to the fight, just like we did back in the mission planning days, and you do that to every morning when you wake up, that's why freaking, the routines are important, right? And everybody, and I think you and I might have talked about this earlier, but, everybody trying to like find their way, right? It's not trying to find their way. And I think you touched on this with the whole, you just need to transfer those skills, right? But it's not, everybody thinks of that as like, oh, all right, I got to transfer for my resume. It's like, no, you got to transfer them for life, right? You've got to take something and you've got to look at it and go, okay, I had all this structure and I was told when to, do everything in the military. And then when I get out and it's like, woo, freedom, but at the same time, you've got to have some structure there, and then set those goals, right? For us, it was mission objectives, tactical objectives, right? We had them every single time. I mean, I knew them down cold. And I had, 30 of them rolling around in my head at any given time, depending on the mission type, right? I knew if it was close air support, if it was combat search and rescue, strike coordination reconnaissance, it didn't matter, right? I knew what 3093, 303, all of it, right? I knew every doctrine, every publication. I needed to know what line, what page number, because that's what we had to push to. And then you go out of that mentality and go, to, all right, now, hey, you just woke up. What are you going to do? Your brain's like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
Like, what do I
Yeah.
do? Right. Like, I don't like, and so I think that's a big part of this, right? And gets into why when you have veterans that are successful leaders and or not, right? Two, because really it comes down to just what are you going to set your mind to, and you have to find a way to transfer that energy almost. And I'm not saying in like a uh, you know, uh, spiritual way or anything like that, but really just your brain operated in a certain manner and trained to that manner, right? Which is also why I hate the argument, especially nowadays with the RPA career field. They're like, well, we're not flying as much as we did back then, right? I'd mentioned we very routinely did 6 to 7 hour missions almost nightly there, and now there might be 3 to 4 hours. I'm like, that's great, but your brain, your body, you're still packing the same lunch, you're still setting the same alarm clock, you're still waking up at the same time for the same shift on the same rotation, and you're still building in a complete pattern that never breaks, right? And it never your foot never comes off the gas. And so, and it's worse because when people get out, right? Like I'm trying to think of a comparison here, but I mean, I guess it'd be like a firefighter in the military, right? With it, what do they do when they get out? Probably go be a firefighter on the outside, right? Well, guess what? I can't
It's not the
not
same.
not yet. I can't take my kid's school bus and go fly it, from my house to the school or anything like that. I can't be a, RPA school bus driver yet. So until then, I've got to go do contract work, right? And so your nervous system and your body are right in the exact same piece there.
Well, but it's more than that. I mean, for me, logistics in the
Mm-hmm.
military did not look the same as logistics out of the
Mm-hmm.
military. You're right. I didn't go into the government world, but I went straight into logistics when I got my first job outside of the military. And infantry guys, just like your career field, what are they supposed to do next? Yeah, they have all these leadership skills, but what are they supposed to do?
Mm-hmm.
And I always encourage people, find that local military community of people that transitioned and figured out something else to do, and figure out how they can help you find your next mission. Because the one-on-one counseling, I think it's preemptive and it can be good.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're trying to process all of this trauma and then you go home without a mission, I mean, your self-talk is going to outweigh any counseling that you do, and that's
Absolutely.
one thing that I noticed as well. So you gotta find something to do, whether it's go biking and have go to clubs all day if you're 100% disabled or whatever the case may be,
Mm-hmm.
or if you to go get a job, or to, I mean, I started a podcast. This is
Mm-hmm.
part of my therapy. It's great because I get to talk to other people like you. But I
Mm-hmm.
mean, whatever that is, you got to find a mission. I also have a business. I'm doing probably way more than I ever did when I was in the mill. I'd lose my
Same.
mind half the time every day. Yeah, yeah, which
And
is okay.
I
That's
think
good.
it's a
No, that's good.
compensation piece, but yeah.
Well, the comp. Let's not go there. Um, but the mission part we got anyway. But just finding something to do, something meaningful to you to do, and then find a community of people who think the same way, of maybe if they've gone through some similar experiences or they're having the same problems,
Mm-hmm.
that you are, or did have the same problems after they got out of the military, so they can help you get through it.
Absolutely, absolutely. That whole finding your tribe, I think fits very well there.
Yeah, it does. Well, but Tanner, before we completely wrap up here, I have to ask this question because I ask everybody this question. If you had one thing that you could share with the audience to help them get to whatever that next step is, what would that be?
I would say realize that the military gave you, that special set of skills, right? In some way, shape, or form. And while when you get out, those direct one-to-ones don't may not look the same anymore, right? Especially for unique career fields and backgrounds. There is some way that it'll transition, and sometimes you're half the time you're only like, half a certification or that kind of stuff. I mean, there's so many resources nowadays too, as far as that kind of stuff goes, that like don't sell yourself short when you get out. Because I think of, for me too, it was, right at the end there, I'm just like, all right, I'm gonna go do contracting, and that was like really my whole plan at that point, and that only lasted 3 years for me. So it's don't sell yourself short, and really be able to be open to what skills you have and what those could transfer to, and freaking use AI to help you if you can't brainstorm it. If you're not using AI to brainstorm stuff, you're missing out. It's you don't need to write stuff with it, but it's fantastic for like if you're stuck on a thought or a project or whatever, and just being able to kind of have an active notepad, if you will. That's the way that I think about it.
Yep. Use your tools,
Hmm.
use your friends, use the military community around you, but
Yeah.
don't sit there and stare at the TV and wonder why you're going freaking crazy.
Yeah. Exactly.
because you will.
Yes.
That what's going on between your ears is a very dangerous place.
Hmm.
So if you stay there, you're not going to have a great time.
Yeah.
It's probably worse than being in prison.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep. Well, thank you, Tanner, for coming on here. I mean,
Absolutely.
I think the perspective of another form of a combat veteran is a very important one to have
Hmm.
on here. And I think you did a great job articulating that and sharing the what you did and how and the struggles that were associated with that career field. And so I appreciate you coming on here today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Yep, not a problem at all. And anybody who's watching or now or in the future, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, leave a comment below to let us know what you think, or especially if you want to connect with Tanner or talk to him about any of this stuff, because I'm sure he's open to it, just like I'm always open to it. But make sure you continue following the journey. I appreciate you coming along this far. And don't forget to go to Amazon.com and buy the book Speak Up, Show Up, Lead. Yeah, that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
This way.
Whichever side. Yeah.
Yeah, somewhere. All right, everybody. Have a good day.